Welcome to the Climate Buzz podcast. The Climate Buzz is hosted and produced by Dr. Bob Hanna, Walker Sproul, and Brad Rouse. Each week we share with you the people, the science, the stories, the challenges, and the solutions of the climate crisis. We invite you to like our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube pages, where you'll have access to all the links, information, and footage discussed on the Climate Buzz. The Climate Buzz is produced by Asheville FM, a nonprofit, volunteer-driven community radio station based in Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville FM is dedicated to producing diverse and eclectic programming that inspires our listeners to build connections across our communities and to discover new music and ideas. The Climate Buzz airs live on Mondays, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and can be heard locally on 103.3 FM and streamed and archived at www.ashevillefm.org. Today's guest on the Climate Buzz is Lauren Steiner, an activist fighting to protect the people and the planet from the greed of billionaires and corporations. Her podcast, The Robust Opposition, can be heard on Facebook and YouTube. This episode of the Climate Buzz first aired live on Asheville FM on October 3rd, 2022. Well, good morning.
Good morning. We're so proud of Brad being out there getting work done, following up on these Duke hearings, taking it to absolutely the next level.
Is that where he is today?
I don't know, but that's why he wasn't here last week, I know. So
I know he's got a lot on his plate right now, and he's keeping busy, and I know a lot of it's climate work that he's doing.
Right. And taking care of ourselves is also climate work.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Like self-care gives us the power to keep going.
Yeah. Well, we do have a guest on the line today, or at least I hope she's on the line, as the Asheville FM studio line can sometimes be a little precarious. But we would like to welcome today's guest, Lauren Steiner, who's an activist local here, who's fighting to protect the people and the planet from the greed of billionaires and corporations. Her podcast, The Robust Opposition, can be heard on Facebook and YouTube. And Lauren, welcome to the Climate Buzz.
Thank you very much, Bob. I'm happy to be on.
Oh, we're so happy to have you here today. We're going to start things off today with our segment, Climate on the Radar. And Walker, there was something you wanted to talk about.
Absolutely. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who heard the plea from Mary Crow on our episode last week, the Just Organizer for the Indigenous Earth or Environmental Network. And she asked us to call and say no dirty deal about Manchin's deal being snuck in there. And it worked. I don't know who did what. Everybody showed up. And that's really what it takes, is everybody calling, everybody saying, this is what has to happen. And everybody did. And so congratulations. It has been stopped. But they have, of course, they're going to keep pushing forward. They want to keep working on permitting reform, right, which is pretty sneaky. But we did it. Good job. And if you're interested in listening into that full interview, you can find that on our page for the Climate Buzz at ashevillefm.org.
Yeah. Did you catch that in the news, Lauren? The Mountain Valley pipeline being temporarily stalled?
Oh, yeah, no, I was part of that effort. The very first organization that told me about fracking, which was Food and Water Watch 10 years ago, led a huge effort, the People versus Fossil Fuels. They had a protest in front of the White House back in June. Then they went over to the Bureau of the Interior. And what they did was they mobilized over 700 organizations and over 400 scientists and health professionals actually wrote a letter against this. And then they apparently led text banking through August and September, reaching their supporters, held dozens of office visits, lobby meetings, and rallies with their volunteers and organizers, and then generated over 10,000 calls to members of Congress. And recently, right before this thing fell apart, Winona Hodder and I think 11 other organizers, environmental organization heads, were arrested in New York, San Francisco, and D.C. over this. So it was a great effort. But you're right, back. They're looking for the next must-pass bill, which is probably going to be the defense spending bill. But what was really interesting about this was one of the reasons it failed was that Republicans didn't think it went far enough, and they didn't want to give Democrats a win. Mm-hmm. So, whenever I post anything on my Facebook page here in North Carolina, and I know that we're dealing with Republican senators, I said, call them up and tell them it didn't go far enough. Whatever it takes to get them to vote no.
Yeah. What were they wanting? How far did they want to take it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know any more than I just said about
yeah.
I do want to throw in here, too, it didn't just fall apart. It actually got destroyed. So I want to turn that energy around to, we did this.
Yeah.
It takes our energy and action, and we did it.
Yeah.
So good on you. Thank you for leading the fight all of these years, because that's how it came to this culmination.
Yeah.
But we have to realize this is not a culmination. This is actually just one peak.
Yeah.
And we're going to need more.
But it's the template for one way to fight back and to be, in such a coordinated effort. I mean, it's just remarkable, Lauren, what you described and how much coordination and communication and working together that took to get the strong message out that, this Mountain Valley pipeline is really dangerous to our future.
Mm-hmm. And what was interesting was Tim Kaine came in and joined with Bernie Sanders to say they would vote no on this. And then the two of them worked together on another bill. And I'm just like, what's this buddy act going on between Bernie Sanders and Tim Kaine here?
Yeah.
It's strange.
I mean, but sometimes they're looking for that opportunity to get into the industry, literally, these are politicians. They are professional politicians, so how do we lure them over to our side?
Well, and speaking of that, in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, that is one of the costliest and deadliest hurricanes to hit Florida, which is a Republican-led state, and Governor Ron DeSantis, who has been kind of a vocal climate denier for a long time, has been speaking in the aftermath of this Florida storm and what needs to happen. He's, out there. If you remember DeSantis, he was the one that nixed the funding for the hurricane that went through New York and New Jersey. Sandy, that's right. And, his argument was, there's just too much pork in it. Because what they'll do, right, they'll do a funding bill, but then they'll attach a bunch of stuff to it to get passed. But he was vocal critic of, what was clearly a community in crisis. And of course, now he is in a similar position where he is trying to rally for funding, and that is desperately needed, as it is it's really bad right now down in Florida.
And the worst part about it is the people who are being impacted most are the poorest and most marginalized communities who have already been experiencing flooding and drought and these things, and not having access to resources. So he is speaking out, asking for this, and people will hold it against him that he voted, that he was vocal against it for somebody else. But who's going to lose? The people.
Right.
The people in Florida.
every single Republican member of the Florida delegation and their 2 senators voted against funding relief to Florida. That's just, right. I don't know how they think they can do that
in
an election year.
Because they're rich. Because they're not going to be impacted by this. They can fly away from it. They can move away from it. Sorry, not sorry. But that's right. Really...
They're not personally impacted by
at
it.
all. At all. Right. Except for that it might lose them or gain them some votes. Yeah. Right? I mean, they are politicians. So... But that's really the main thing that I've noticed about all of this hurricane coverage is the communities that are in need are communities who actually have already been in need. They're communities who have been pushed out.
Well, but I'll tell you, too, that this storm also hit some pretty rich folks, too. And the Sanibel Island, which is one of the barrier islands, on the Gulf side of Florida, which is near Fort Myers and Cape Coral. Also Pine Island, so these are kind of resorty yacht club islands, and they're certainly, not everybody there is rich. So, I recognize that. But, this one, slammed into a lot of number of resorts and ended up, I think they're estimating the damage in Florida in the billions right now, of dollars in what's been in the type of damage. And they say that even though Florida is one of the highest percentage of homes that carry flood insurance, only about 15% of Florida residents have flood insurance. So because of the massive amount of surge of ocean that caused this flooding, it hit a lot of people and ruined their homes, and they don't have the insurance to cover it. So,
and something too, just to throw out here, being somebody who has a past in recycling and solid waste, think about all of the stuff that is now going to be piled on the side of the roads to try to clear it away.
It's everywhere.
It is now toxic waste. You have to deal with it as hazardous waste. And so I'm just going to throw back to a tip of the week that we gave a little while ago, which is go ahead and get rid of all those old chemicals on the floors of your garage, organize it, get things ready just in case. Because a lot of the stories I'm reading in my, pet groups online is that animals are eating things like rat poison that just got flooded out of people's homes and now are all over in Florida. And that takes it real. That's real, you know?
Well, not interesting because it's really sad. But it happened in this story. It was only less than 24 hours that this community got evacuation orders. So whoever was in charge down there was kind of betting on what had been the current trajectory for this storm to hit land more north of them, and then ended up being the epicenter of the hit. So a lot of people, I wonder, what, as in the days leading up, that they had this feeling of safety and security because the storm was going to miss them.
No, in Florida, you don't really feel safe until it's gone. But
there were a lot. I mean, there was over 1,600 people that had to be rescued from the National Guard and U.S. Coast Guard. The island, the bridges to the islands, and with one of them, Sanibel Island or Pine Island, I think it was. There's only one bridge to the island, and that was destroyed. So this was a boat and helicopter kind of rescue mission that there just seemed like there were a lot of people who stuck around and rode it out, and maybe that's just kind of the personal choice is to stay with your stuff and see if you can make it. Although I think people continue to underestimate what a world when the sea levels rise and the storms get bigger, just what that looks like and how high and how far this and how damaging, the ocean can be when it swells in this way.
Right. And one thing I do have to tack on here. because everything you said is very on point. But also, there are a lot of people who do not have the choice to evacuate.
Yeah.
They are left behind.
Nowhere to go.
Not just nowhere to go, but something that another Asheville FM volunteer posted at DIY Abled is there are a lot of people who have disabilities who don't have the resources they need if they evacuate. And so how do we support people who cannot evacuate? Yeah.
Although one aspect of the story too, and that surprised me, was there were shelters in place, and that they reported that it was very low attendance in the number who kind of took advantage of getting out of their place and getting to a shelter that would be in higher ground and safe from the flooding.
Sure.
Yeah. Lauren, when you look at Hurricane Ian in Florida, what comes to mind for you?
Well, you were just talking about it, evacuating.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a climate refugee from Los Angeles. I mean, I left for other reasons, but I will tell you that I packed up my car to evacuate twice in 2019 because the wildfires were so close to my house. I mean, I didn't have to do it, but, the Skirball fire, for example, if the wind had blown east instead of west, my house and all my neighbors would be gone. So
it really is just that fast, like literally the wind shifting and like the trajectory of the hurricane. It is nature. We do not have control of this. We have to prepare ahead of time, right? Or get out of the way. I don't know.
Yeah, I also fought successfully for the closure of the San Onofre nuclear power plant. That was a very long campaign, and it was because of a leak that precipitated final closing of it. And we had Barbara Boxer get involved. She was our senator then, and I just tweeted out recently that it's too bad that she's no longer the senator because Gavin Newsom just greenlit more years of the Diablo Canyon pipeline, and that was slated to close in 2025. But after the horrendous heat wave, you probably heard about it, it lasted 2 weeks, temperatures over 100 degrees all over California. They just realized that they needed the electricity. And the problem is that they've known for a long time. California was on the forefront. We passed the Global Warming Solutions Act back in 2005 to get the emissions levels back to 1990 levels by 2020, and we got to that goal earlier. But they didn't build out the infrastructure. I mean, there was the Million Solar Roofs bill in 2004, which I also worked on, and that got us 1 million solar roofs ahead of schedule. But as far as the transmission lines and larger plants, they didn't build them. So they're now caught behind the 8 ball. And the problem with Diablo Canyon is it's sitting on these fault lines. It's releasing waste into the ocean, which is killing ocean plant life. And, to come full circle to your point about evacuation, one of the protests that I suggested for San Onofre was that we do a car action. We all go onto the 405 freeway and just drive very slowly, because basically that's one freeway that 9 million people in the San Diego area would have to get onto to evacuate if there was a nuclear accident. I mean, it wouldn't work,
Yeah.
And now they're burying the waste under, because they are decommissioning it, and they're burying it in these dry casks, storage casks, 100 feet from the ocean in the sand in a tsunami zone.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, but, it's extremely dangerous, and what's happening in California right now is like a backtracking from where we were going all these years. And, I tried for 10 years, fighting fracking to get first Jerry Brown and then Gavin Newsom to ban fracking, and they didn't do it. They didn't do it because of oil. You need oil for the cars, for transportation. But now with the Inflation Reduction Act, there's going to be a huge push for electric vehicles. So that's a good outcome of that bill.
This goes to show that there's a lot to be said for the long-term organizers, which it appears that you would be, because you're talking about, like, we see that kind of happen all the time, where somebody has like this energy for a project, whether it's a campaign or a show or a school garden, right? And they do it, but once that head person leaves, the whole thing fizzles, right? It's kind of like that. Like, y'all had this big push, but once that leader left, or once the group dissipated, everything fell apart. And so it goes to show, like, there's some real value to the sustainability of keeping activists on it all the time. And
the
how do you do
sustainability
that?
of activists. I like that.
Well, but we burn out activists most of the time. So that's the problem, is we fizzle out. And then how do we keep the system flowing, right? And that's, Lauren, that's something you obviously have experience with.
Well, I will tell you that I think it has a great deal to do with community. I learned recently that the opposite of addiction is connection. Yes. And, there's a new group here in Asheville called Seek Healing. Someone I know they had a listening workshop 2 weekends ago to teach you how to more actively listen to make better connections with people. And I found that, I got involved with the Occupy movement back in 2011, and then in the Bernie Sanders movement back in 2015. And I led LA for Bernie, and I was a delegate for him at the Democratic National Convention. And I found that it was really a group of people that worked together to find meaning and purpose in their lives. And they made friendships, and they were lasting friendships that when Occupy ended, they shifted to another cause. When Bernie's campaign ended, they shifted to another cause. And it was a group of people that just really enjoyed each other's company, that figured out how to work well together, and who was good at what roles. And it just, when it works like a well-oiled machine. But as with any other group of people, you're going to have interpersonal conflicts and group dynamic issues. So, it's hard, but I just think once people have found that purpose, they stick with it.
And that is community. That's community.
Yeah, we didn't have, because I've been here for 21 months now. We didn't have many days like this in Los Angeles. Yeah. I would wake up and be like, oh, another sunny day in Los Angeles.
Hate it for you.
I know. I was just back in LA, over the summer, and I grew up there, so I spent used to be the first half of my life. I've kind of aged out of the first half comment, but
a big portion of your life.
Have a big heart for California. So,
right. And that's actually, everyone, why he does the show right before the Climate Buzz called California Dreamin'.
Yeah, catching that California vibe for sure.
And every time while I'm riding into the station, I'm cruising to his tunes. I love it.
So, Lauren, what was the moment in your life that kind of sparked, your climate activism, that said, I'm going to step in and do something?
Well, I always say that I was an environmentalist since the first Earth Day. I'm dating myself now, but it was 1970, and I remember going to an Earth Day celebration. For the life of me, I can't remember what it was, but I did go. And then I think in college, the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident happened, and I had the China syndrome with Jane Fonda and Jack Lemmon, and it was about a fictional meltdown. And she was a reporter, he was a plant manager. And I saw that movie, and then the accident happened, and I went back to watch the movie, this time with a notepad, and I wrote an article for the alternative newspaper called The China Syndrome, First the Movie, Now the Mess. And what happened was, when I was in college, I was up in New England, and there was the Seabrook nuclear power plant that was being built. And the Clamshell Alliance was organizing against it, and I remember getting active in that. But then I didn't really do much climate-related stuff until all the way till 10 years ago, 2012, when I just happened to learn what fracking was. I really never knew about it before. And I was going to the Office of Food and Water Watch for some other thing I was doing for Occupy and picking up something. And I saw these pamphlets, and I read about it, and they told me that it was being done right there in Los Angeles, in the middle of a city, with 3 million people directly surrounding it. And I found out it was the largest urban oil field in North America. And I learned about, fracking has so many dangers. I mean, not only the methane emissions, methane being 86 times more potent to greenhouse gas than CO2, but also the health effects, the effects of, all the trucks driving on the roads, ruining the roads prematurely, the man camps and all the crime and drug and rapes that they have, like in places like North Dakota, and just all sorts of problems with fracking. And I didn't realize, because I had written an article in 2010, there was a day called 10-10-10, and it was a big celebration that I wrote an article about it, Beyond Coal and Greenpeace. I mean, Greenpeace and Sierra Club had the Beyond Coal campaign, and it was how we were going to get Los Angeles off of these coal-fired plants and to natural gas. And I thought, oh, natural gas, that sounds good, because I was schooled just like everybody else. And I don't know if you guys ever read this, but Carl Pope, who was the longtime executive director of the Sierra Club, was forced to resign in shame because it turned out he had taken a $10 million contribution from Chesapeake Energy, which was the largest national gas producer in America. So here we were touting getting off coal and only to go onto natural gas. So when I found this out, I joined this new organization that was forming called Californians Against Fracking, and our goal was to try to get Jerry Brown to ban fracking in California, because in addition to Los Angeles, they were also fracking in the farm fields up in Central California, which is the breadbasket for the nation. So all these poor farm workers, their kids were coming to school, most of them had inhalers because of the asthma they had from living around these fracking fields. And so we used to do what they call bird dogging. Anytime he ever went anywhere, we would be out there with our signs. And, when he tried to position himself as a climate leader, one of our favorite signs was "Climate Leaders Don't Frack." And, we kind of took this to Gavin Newsom after Brown stepped down. And then we even took it to Eric Garcetti in Los Angeles, where the last successful climate campaign I worked on was the Department of Water and Power, which is a municipally owned utility, unlike Duke, was going to spend $6 billion investing in these 3 aging gas plants that were not in California. One was in Utah, the other was in Nevada, I think. But we had one of our own, my friend Aura Vasquez, who she had worked for the Sierra Club, and she's very politically oriented, and she got herself appointed by Garcetti to the Board of Commissioners of this publicly owned utility. And they were all ready to go with the consultant's report that they were going to do this, and she came out publicly. It cost her job because she embarrassed Garcetti, and she had to resign. but she came out publicly and said, we don't need to do this. It's very similar to what's happening with Duke right now with their carbon plan. And so she came out publicly. The LA Times wrote an article about it. We mobilized all those groups that I told you about. We had, so we had Sierra Club and Food and Water Watch and Sunrise Movement and 350 SoCal. And we did rallies outside of their meetings, and we went in there and we testified, and we ended up killing that deal. And it was wonderful because, one of the things I talked about activism, that you need community and purpose. You also need to have these incremental wins because incremental wins serve to boost morale and grow the movement. So we were really excited about that, and I always used it as an example of one of the campaigns that I worked on that was actually successful, because most of them are not. But
while you were talking about it, I was like, how lucky to start on a win, right? Like that's a really good one, and a great technique that y'all were able to carry on from one to another. That's effective.
Yeah. Well, actually, the first campaign that I was the lead organizer on was back in 2013, and it was to get this woman, Fran Pavley, to drop her bill. She was the one that authored the Global Warming Solutions Act that I told you about. That was a model for many other states, but it was all through market-based mechanisms like cap and trade, mostly in California. So in other words, okay, Richmond can continue to pollute Chevron can continue to pollute in Richmond, which is mostly a poor community of color, as long as they buy some rainforest in, South America or something.
Those offsets.
Yeah, and there's this REDD program, REDD. I don't know what it stands for, but that's where I first started organizing with indigenous peoples, because they're totally against this, obviously, because what happens is communities where the indigenous people are doing fine with their sustainable living, and then they come in with these fracking plants, and they kick the people, or not fracking plants, I'm sorry, they're keeping it sustained. They're keeping it pristine, but for whatever reason, and I don't know the mechanism of this, they end up getting kicked off of their own land, and then they have to go into the regular economy, which they're not really skilled at, and a lot of them, turn to drugs or alcohol. It's a horrible story. But this next bill that she was working on was to regulate fracking, and it was so weak. I mean, even if you believed that regulations could make fracking safe, which they can't, this bill didn't say you had to have 2,500 feet between a fracking well and a home, school, or a business. This bill didn't say the wells had to be this thick, the concrete had to be this thick. No, it basically said, you had to notify people 30 days before a frack, as if that would give them any time to do anything. You had to disclose what the chemicals were, which we already knew because they were disclosed to Henry Waxman's Energy and Commerce Committee. You had to do groundwater monitoring, which, what's the point of that after you've already contaminated the water? And there was going to be a study. So they have endless studies, and it's a stalling tactic they always do. And I fought this bill, and my whole thing was, because she had appeared, Fran Pavley had appeared at two of the things that I did when I was doing this Million Solar Roofs bill. One of the things that I did before I started doing protests was I would do these screenings of documentaries and then have panel discussions afterwards. So back in 2004, or whenever The Inconvenient Truth came out, Al Gore's movie, we did a screening, and she came, and Mary Nichols, who was the head of the California Air Resources Board, came and spoke about this bill. And then I had these postcards to send to Schwarzenegger, who was the governor then. And so that's what I, always did. Don't do something educational unless you had an action item with it. Don't get people stirred up to think something is appalling unless you can immediately have them do something about it.
Right.
But,
Give them
you
that
know,
outlet for the energy, right?
Yeah. So I bought this bill, and what I did was I got a petition, and I got Move On involved and Credo Action involved, and we had 20,000 signatures on this petition to get her. And the way we phrased it was withdraw your bill and lead our movement to ban fracking, so we could make her a hero, you know? And I talked to her. I got these signatures, and we were going to do a signature delivery, a petition delivery event at her office. And I did that. We had 80 people there, and several of us made little speeches. And I actually called her in advance because I had this prior relationship with her, and I wanted to give her the heads up. I said, we're coming. Do you want to be there? Do you want to not be there? And while I had her on the phone, I tried to convince her to drop the bill. And I audio taped this recording, which I still have, not because you can use it, because California, you need both parties to consent to a tape. But, you know, I have a very bad memory, and I just wanted to kind of memorialize this conversation. And because I did that, I'll never forget how she said, you know, I said, Lauren, she says, I said, Fran, what can we do to get you to drop your bill and lead our movement? And she said, well, Lauren, you know, I'm not going to allow the oil companies to get their way, and we still have 8 weeks to get a strong bill signed by the legislature. So what happened was, after it sailed through all the committees in the state assembly and the state senate, Jerry Brown, our friend, who, you know, I worked for in 92. I was his media advisor when he ran for president, when he was progressive.
Wow.
And over the years, he became really conservative. Jerry Brown asked her to add all these amendments that the lawyers for the Center for Biological Diversity determined would lead to unregulated fracking for the next 2 years while the study was being done. So even the big green groups, there were only 4 of them, who had sponsored the bill. And the reason they sponsored it, according to them, was to get a seat at the table so that they could influence the legislator. And they tried themselves to get her to take off these amendments, and she wouldn't. So they took their names off the bill. The last day, the LA Times wrote an editorial called "A Fracking Bill Gone Bad." And the next day, the legislature and the whole legislature passed it. And then 2 years later, because I was on the call as press, you know, they had a press call, and I wanted to ask questions like, how many people had requested groundwater monitoring? How many people, you know, did the notification? It was like 4 people requested the groundwater monitoring. And what did the study turn out? Obviously, what all these studies turn out, we need more studies. But we then found, and this is the killer, we found that the industry injected toxic fracking wastewater into drinking water aquifers 2,500 times. Yeah, so it really was bad.
And we're talking about like farmland. You were talking about like them literally going into the farms and doing this there. And that means their livelihood too. Their plants are now dead. Their animals are now not able to be raised. This is their livelihoods as well as literally their life. Their, you know, water is life. So fracking is there is no good fracking bill. They're all bad.
Well, and to, you know, to be so uncaring and nonchalant about how to get rid of toxic waste. How many times do we hear that story over and over again? We were telling it last week with the story, you know, here that happened in North Carolina many years ago where, you know, it's just fine to take toxic chemicals and put them into the land and into the community, you know, to save a buck.
Like the coal ash by Duke Energy.
Without any thought to, you know, what this is, where this is going to go and who it's going to affect. It's like it does. I mean, how can you not even consider?
If it doesn't affect them directly, they do not care.
Well, I wanted to make mention, Lauren, that part of your podcast, The Robust Opposition, that is trying to protect the people on the planet from the greed of billionaires and corporations. And I think, I can really agree with, that greed and making lots of money is part of what is making it so hard to really bring climate action to fruition.
Well, one of the greatest things we did, because I want to keep on this theme that you brought up about why people do it, and I mentioned community and purpose and success. It's fun. I was thinking about this toxic fracking wastewater thing, and another action we did a regulators workshop. They were actually having workshops where the oil companies would come and learn how to get around doing an environmental impact report to do this. So when we found that out, we said, all right, we're going to disrupt this. They were having it at the Ramada Inn in, I think it was Long Beach. So we actually rented a hotel room. Food and Water Watch sprung for the cost of the hotel room. And we wrote a script, and we had everybody kind of play their parts and rehearse in this hotel room. And I wore a dress, and we all pretended that like we were part of the industry. So we go in there, and the first thing that I do is I'm like, wait a minute. And somebody made a video of this. It's great. Wait a minute. Shouldn't you be telling us how to keep our drinking water safe instead of how to get around doing these regulations? And they're like, oh, we're going to have time for questions at the end, And then Alicia Rivera from Center Communities for a Better Environment, which is an environmental justice group down there, she got up and she had this bottle of dirty water. And she said, this is fracking wastewater. Would you drink this water? And then she starts walking up to the regulators. And then everybody gets up and we started chanting. And I forget what we were chanting, but we automatically assumed that the California Highway Patrol would come and take us out right away. Well, we were chanting for so long, we had to wing it and start thinking of different chants. They weren't moving us. And,
right.
So everybody came up with their own idea. And we unfurled this banner, and then they took us out. And as we were leaving, we were saying, we will be back. We will be back. And there was such an exhilaration after that, when you do that kind of action. Code Pink, which is one of my favorite peace groups, Medea Benjamin kind of taught me about that, because she's constantly going into these big presentations in Washington, D.C. She's interrupted Kissinger. She tried to put handcuffs on Dick Cheney. I mean, these are the kind of things that really, motivate you. Your heart starts pounding before you're about to do this, but once you're in it, it's extremely exhilarating. And, it takes all these kind of tactics. It really does. I mean, that's one thing I learned in Occupy, diversity of tactics. So whatever anybody wants to do, even if they just want to write a letter to the editor or, representative, it's all good. It's all good.
You're exactly right. And whatever people want to put into it, do it. There are other people out there who are doing the same thing, right? Sometimes we feel like we're doing it in isolation, but your community is out there, everybody.
I wanted to ask you, Lauren, how it's been transitioning to the Asheville area and getting connected here, and how that journey's been for you.
Well, I'm not shy, as you can imagine. To be an activist, you can't really be shy. So and a journalist, I'm good at researching. So I kind of researched what the issues were, who was doing what, got into this Facebook group, Asheville Politics, been reading the Citizen Times and the Mountain Express, even before I moved here online to just try to see what some of the issues were. And then I just started calling people, mostly from the organizations, to have coffee meetings with them or lunch meetings just to find out what was going on and where I can get involved. And if not getting involved in actually working with them, at least covering their protests. Because I did a lot, in addition to doing my show, which is an interview show, I used to live stream a lot of protests. And so I remember one of the first things that I did here was the Asheville Primary School They were trying to get the school board not to shut down their school. I live streamed that protest and interviewed some of the organizers. I don't know if it was Raise Up North Carolina or which organization, Just Economics, was there. I know I interviewed Emma Hutchins.
Yeah.
That was at in Mills River at the Amazon location to do a protest in solidarity with the Amazon workers. And I was fortunate. I had the second interview ever on YouTube with Chris Smalls, who was fired by Amazon in Staten Island, New York, and then started the Amazon Labor Union and won that incredible victory. I had him on my show like 2 weeks after he was fired with his partner, Derek Palmer. So I'm really into like labor issues as well. I feel like that's where there's the most hope in our movement now, all these strikes. And, you know, since the pandemic, workers have been able to organize and get more money. And it just galls me to no end what the Federal Reserve is doing right now, raising interest rates to intentionally cause a recession so people will lose their jobs. And this is all under the guise of trying to stop inflation. Well, it's not going to do that.
This to take away worker power that we have now been gaining. So union strong, my friends. Hang in there.
Yeah.
Keep fighting.
Keep fighting. That's how I end all my shows. And then I found out that Lee Camp, who does a great show, Redacted Tonight, he was ending his shows that way. And he started his show first, and I felt embarrassed. Like, what? I'd never listened to his show all the way to the end. But he was kind. He didn't say I had to stop saying it.
His show is now called A Moment of Clarity. So it's excellent.
Right.
Excellent. He covers great environmental stuff.
Yeah, I know Lee Camp. He I can't remember when I met him. I think it was when he came to LA to do one of his shows, and I did a thing. I forget what it was for. His girlfriend, Eleanor Goldfield, has a band, the Radical Revolutionaries, or something like that.
Yep.
And she was on my show talking about net neutrality, which was another issue. I was the point person talking about coalitions. There were 2 national coalitions, and I was the LA point person, meaning I did all the actions in LA. And the campaigns were to get Obama to institute net neutrality and also to get Obama to stop pushing the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would have been like NAFTA on steroids. And I did like 4 different protests at his fundraisers in Beverly Hills and Los Angeles. And tangled with the Secret Service a couple of times because they no, seriously, and you know, I have this one picture on Facebook that I love, which is me pointing my finger in the chest of one of these guys, and I look at that, and also I was involved with the racial justice movement, and I look at that and I say, you know, if I were black, they would have shot me.
Yeah,
you know,
but robust opposition is definitely the truth. You are using your power and privilege to get it done. Thank you so much, Lauren Steiner.
Yeah, we're gonna have to go to a break and kind of wrap up the show. Lauren, thank you so much for making time to be part of the Climate Buzz, and we hope to have you back again sometime.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
So Walker, we just got a minute or two. What's the green tip of the day that we can put out there for our listeners?
Oh, right. So we are moving into the transition time where we're starting to use the heaters in our homes versus the air conditioning systems. And so one thing I want to throw out here is that a clean system is an efficient system. So sometimes the best thing that you can do for your heater, your car, your air conditioner, your fans, anything is to clean it or get it serviced by a professional. So this is a really good time. even though it might be a little late, I guess. But this is a good time to get your...
It's always a good time.
You're right. Now is better than later when it breaks, right? But go ahead and get your HVAC system maintained. You can do it once a year. They can come out and take care of the air conditioner and the heater essentially in one stop, and that way you have comfort. And it can save you not just money, because it'll be a trivial amount of money, but how comfortable you feel in your home, how often you hear that heater kicking on, right?
Yeah.
It really can make a huge
And
difference.
it's flowing efficiently, and when those filters and such, or the machine starts to kind of break down a little bit, it's working harder than it needs to and putting stress on the system. So it definitely reminds me of one of my jobs is to change those air filters to get the ladder out. And some of them are a little hard to reach, but that's okay. And change them out, because they recommend changing them out monthly, right? It was one of our guests had talked about, which I do probably quarterly, but
yeah, I mean, it depends on the system, also the filter that you use, as well as do you have animals in the home? Are there people who have allergies in the home? So these are things that all factor into how often you need to change it, but most importantly, you need to change it. Change those filters, maintain that system, and it will work for you for years.
And tell a friend.
And tune into the Climate Buzz.
Thank you for listening to the Climate Buzz podcast. The Climate Buzz is hosted and produced by Dr. Bob Hanna, Walker Sproul, and Brad Rouse. Each week we share with you the people, the science, the stories, the challenges, and the solutions of the climate crisis. We invite you to like our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube pages, where you'll have access to all the links, information, and footage discussed on the Climate Buzz. The Climate Buzz is produced by Asheville FM, a nonprofit, volunteer-driven community radio station based in Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville FM is dedicated to producing diverse and eclectic programming that inspires our listeners to build connections across our communities and to discover new music and ideas. The Climate Buzz airs live on Mondays, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and can be heard locally on 103.3 FM and streamed and archived at www.ashevillefm.org.